G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 16th of March 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate. And as the war continues, I'd like to remind you the drone war started with Ukraine. They needed a low-cost replacement for the Javelins they expended in the early phases of the war. Now, the Javelins did halt the Russian offensive and prevented the encirclement of Kiev, and then the only thing that got the Russians to withdraw was the promise of a ceasefire, which never happened. The infamous Boris Johnson visit. In the following year, Russia started developing their own drones based on what came out of Afghanistan. They were sold primarily by China and the Afghanis. The Afghanis primarily sold drones and other US equipment to China and Russia. However, Iran bought a lot, but then later sold that to Russia to pay their debts. So you can understand that a lot of the modernization, particularly the Russian army with optics, is the product of reverse engineering. A lot of the drones the Russians had, well, they figured out soon that didn't take long for the Chinese to point out that the Ukrainian drones were coming straight out of Shanghai. We had many commentators on the left actually pointing this out, that many of the explosive delivery devices used by Yemen, Iran, and Russia and Ukraine were all actual products of China. A lot of them, however, small motors, were actually made in Ukraine in the first place. Ukraine did have small motors. They did have a fledgling, I believe, robotics industry that was turned into a drone industry. So right now, drones are the hottest topic. But where Russia has been making most of its success, well, 122mm air-launched rockets, the Su-25, and other aircraft. But on the western side, it's primarily now the Tempest. Most of the other vehicles, particularly Bradleys, they're starting to come to an end of either service life or being destroyed by Russians. Now, the Tempest is cheap, so Ukraine can replace them just as fast as other vehicles, but for a far less cost. So right now this war is going down in cost, primarily Ukraine going broke, but at the same time they're trying to inflate the costs of the other side by overwhelming each other's air defenses. Now Ukraine, of course, with interceptor drones, Russia has now interceptor drones, hand launched. Both sides are predominantly now looking for a way to deal with drones. However, Russia is looking for not just a way to deal with Ukraine's drones, but a way to eliminate more, because drones can't deliver enough firepower per target. They're just too small, too light, and bigger drones, more technology, makes them easier to track and shoot down. So right now they're turning to other means. Now, before we continue, I'm going to update the you on the map situation, in which Russia has sent drones into Kiev and other areas, including their favorite Kharkiv, Dnipro, and however, here. If we go to the Zaporozhye, a lot of glide bombs were dropped on Zaporozhye today. Now, earlier, Ukraine did issue a warning was issued a warning, but too little too late. They did not realize that Russia was moving so quickly. Usually, Russia builds up and then strikes. Well, no, they're striking as they're building up their numbers of FAB 500s. Now, they've been using them for quite some time now, but never in this quantity and now quality. They have more firepower than before. Why? Because rocket fuel. They pretty much figured, well, why build rockets when you could just put the rocket fuel into a glide bomb and use that? So Russia's adapting. So we have a lot of we have a lot of points of contact on the map, a lot of conflict today, but again, very little results for the Russians today, and nothing for the Ukrainians. Right, a little bit of advance, the push, but in the rest of the area, it's only small gains in open areas, which is limiting the Ukrainian army. They're literally herding the Ukrainians back into towns and cities, clearing out these fields of trenches and Ukrainians, which feels more like building a border than actual offensive actions. And it's hard to say whether or not Russia intends to take Khmelnytskyi and other towns, given they're now bogged down for so long. Why they haven't put renewed effort into the Oblast they wanted so desperately since 2022, with massive offensive in the past, but this year has not been followed up. Now, Ukrainian intelligence has published articles, say, for various reasons, saying they're now they've gone from expecting a winter offensive to a summer offensive to now claiming to have stopped that with their target assassinations of Russians. That is yet to be seen. I believe that's a premature article. And sooner or later, the Russians will start carrying out assassinations of Ukrainians. It's only a matter of time that the Russians, right for now, have not involved in the tit-for-tat. Now, again, there's been a stall on the front, but every so often that stall is suddenly hit by rapid advance. Now, according to the Russian news, they don't make those rapid advances, but what's happening is the media won't update the maps for weeks sometimes. In some areas, they won't at all. So you start to get a discrepancy between Russian reports and Ukrainian maps. Now, the Ukrainians are obviously hoping the Russians get pushed back, but in some areas that hasn't been the case. And worse, they've reported pushing back Russians in areas that the Russians haven't occupied, like this area here. Unless they did and were pushed back, but why didn't you credit them for taking that territory and then getting a pushback? No. It's all ad hoc. They don't have a consistent, clear plan. They just, whatever on the day makes them feel good. And thus you have a distortion of the state of war. Now, the Europeans, of course, are very upset that the US won't give them $90 billion. But it's not $90 billion for a 2-year loan. It's like every month they're making a loan application for $90 billion. And so nobody knows how much money's gone in Ukraine, but millions are being poured out of accounts every day and transported to Ukraine by road. And nobody seems to be curious about that, which is just reminds me of the Leering centres. So, is there quality Leering centres in Ukraine? Absolutely. Is Ukraine spending a lot of cash money on drones and claiming to make them? That's where I think it is headed. Is Ukraine so short of cash for food? Absolutely. I think a lot of these cash payments are going straight to ships to get them to bring stuff to Ukraine. I think they're bribing sea captains. I think they're bribing Chinese businessmen to sell them drone parts. It's all of the above. Paying off Russians to carry out targeted assassinations. It's all the above, right? Whatever you think they're up to with the money, it's not just going into people's pockets. There are probably genuine payoffs to Russian officials, and that's why Ukraine doesn't want these, wants their cash back. Why they want to silence Hungary from asking awkward questions, because Viktor Orban has found some of this cash making its way to political opposition. So yeah, FAB 500s. Now recently they did release the FAB 3000, but it seems to be scaling back to smaller targets, more bombs, smaller targets. And they're putting them in 120mm rockets and for air launching them. They call them vacuum bombs. They even putting them on drones and helicopters and using them against the drone boats in the Black Sea. That's why there haven't been many successful drone boat attacks lately. The Russians are getting better at some things, but there's a stalemate in the drone war, and even Ukraine admits there's a stalemate in the drone war. Now, yes, tens of thousands of mini FABs have been ordered by the military and been stockpiled across Russia, getting ready for a huge offensive, according to Ukrainians. Now, there is plenty of evidence the Russians have definitely got more tanks than they claim, more artillery stockpiled in Belarus, but was it the Belarusian Ministry of Defense or Foreign Ministry said they're expecting European invasion. They said Poland has been preparing now for a year, at least, maybe two, to invade Belarus to take the pressure off Ukraine. Now, Poles have denied this, but yeah, there's been some credible photographs of Polish armed forces building up near the border, and then every time these get published, the Poles say it's just an exercise and go home. But no, you don't have that many military exercises close to the border. They're looking for a pretext. And this is scary, because the last thing we want is another escalation. Now, Trump has called out Zelensky, and Zelensky has called out Trump, saying that he's not interested in defending the Middle East, he's just creating war. And so, yeah, Zelensky's making enemies, but he's so cozying up to the Europeans. Europeans, things aren't going well for them, so they're attacking Trump. They want to embarrass Trump. But as you can see, standard bombs just loaded up with rocket fuel makes them far more potent than your standard explosive bomb. And they suck the oxygen out, basically. So when they go off, they don't kill the tank, they kill the crew. Same with bunkers, they kill the bunker. And doesn't matter how powerful your tank is, right? They drop these. This is how they allegedly captured some of the Abrams, was to basically kill the crew, cook the tank. And they just set upon it with artillery and drag it away. Now, how many of these? Well, and we don't know. Ukraine claims there's tens of thousands of them being stockpiled. It's not Russia who's claiming it. Right? Russia just put out the video. They're that highly explosive. There we go. They strap a device to the bomb and drop the bomb with the device strapped to it. And as you can see, just take out a building, and they're systematically targeting and destroying. Look at the shockwave. The shockwave is the devastating part, not the visible explosion. Yeah, 500. Yeah, got 100s and 500s. There's the 3000. Tractor of finished unloading, delivering. Here's the bigger ones. Assembly points. They have special toolkit. The bombs are delivered as bombs, right? There they are, bombs delivered as bombs, and then they deliver this special toolkit that's strapped to the bomb, and you see it's there strapped to the bomb. That gives it the guidance, the glide bomb capability. So the fighters, interceptors, high altitude aircraft, mostly fighters, there's a 500, are being used to deliver as standoff weapons rather than aerial combat over Ukraine. And there you go, that's strapped on. That's all it is. It's cheaper than a drone and way more lethal. I mean, cheap, like, this is, they're tens of thousands of dollars, but it's cheaper than one Shahed drone, and instead of being a 50 kilogram explosive, this is 500 kilograms of explosive. And right now they're amassing these, and they're hitting, as you can see, targets across Ukraine over the last year. As I said, this is the destruction of alleged destruction of Kroatia. That's that. The Russians have no desire to occupy any of these towns. They're just destroying everything along their border, as I predicted. Now, whether or not they're going to advance is another thing. Yeah, this is a Glasnost guidance pack on top. Now, it's weird. They're launched upside down, if you notice, from the graphic. Yeah, see, the package. And there they go, from way above the clouds. Because the rate of falling, I think it's... they go several meters forward and drop 50 centimeters each time. And, yeah, they're targeted so they can launch these things from the exact distance. And they're hitting targets in Ukraine. These bombs fall for about an hour, sometimes less. I doubt more. But there you go. That's the bigger ones. And they're hitting target after target. And we do not get told what they hit, where they hit, most of the time. Now, a little bit of the time they do reveal what they've hit. Yeah. That's, well, there we go for the cost. But there we go. This is an early phase of the war. They do have now 100s and 3000s. This is Wall Street Journal. This is actually put together by different sources, from different sources. Primarily, I think this is Indian. But the US dollar cost, 4,000, 36,000. But remember, they're carrying 10 times the payload of a Shahed for only 16,000 more. So this is way more cost effective than drones. And India started to purchase them. Russia is actually exporting, and in partnership with Iran and India and China, to start producing these weapons. Now, they have bigger ones, of course. But so far, the most common one we're seeing here is the FAB 500. And yet, Russia's outsourcing these drone or glide bombs to many countries. Right? Of course, see, there it is. 70 kilometers or 45 miles from the border with Ukraine, they air launch. Right, and they fly all the way, glide all the way over Russian territory into Ukraine. Kroatia is just one of several targets, including, I said, right now, a lot of areas in Zaporozhye being hit. And you can see, right, look at the size of the explosion. Based on the area it seems to have hit, Alright, we come in. Alright, so we've had a few up here. Going through. In this region here. There's waterway here. And probably, I would estimate, probably as well up here. Lightly watered, big open area. No, this is a change in Russian tactics. Of course, Ukraine will be looking to try and find a way to detect and intercept glide bombs because they don't have an electronic signal. They're receiving inertial never guided. They're not inertial. GPS basically. They do. They burn out cities. Now, why the Russians aren't advancing in and occupying the area? There you go. That's the different sizes of some of their models. There's the 250, the 50. They don't have the 100 there, which is a air-launched rocket. I guess because it's air-launched, not a guide bomb. But there are different variations depending on its whether it's carrying a gel or a liquid or a high explosive. But they have rockets. Some have boosters to... I don't know if it's exactly how they're using them. But as you can see, they dive in and then go off. Either airburst or in this case impact. And then they have a drone watching. And that's it. They are loading up for daily runs over the skies of Ukraine. And then you can see there's nothing stopping them. There's no air defense, nothing. There's no forward air defense. The Ukrainians have no forward air defense. Where are all these Tempests? Where are all these missiles that were sent to Ukraine? Where's all the... They're all further back, protecting the bigger cities. There's no forward air defense. So why hasn't Russia overwhelmed the Ukrainian army? And I can only answer that right now they're not hitting the Ukrainian army. They're hitting economic targets, which means they're not fighting to push back the Ukrainians anymore. They're fighting to literally bankrupt Ukraine to hold the territory they have. It looks like Russia is not advancing, and deliberately so. Putin is not screaming or yelling at him. He's not firing any generals. He's not calling emergency meetings and saying, right, we've got a new offensive general. No, it looks like they're either definitely building, right? They're building lots of drones. They're building lots of bombs, but they stopped building T-80s, but they're still building T-90s and T-72s. They're still converting a lot of T-56s into training tanks. So, what's happening is a lack of logic. And whenever there's a lack of logic, it means there's a greater strategy at play, which hasn't fallen into place yet. So once it falls into place and the Russians attack, then we'll know what their new strategy is. But there's definitely a lot of attacks on Ukrainians. They haven't stopped, and the Russians have hit a checkpoint near Chernihiv. But again, this was just a target of opportunity or part of a secret border strategy for Russians moving about behind enemy lines. I would say it's the latter, right? Destroy checkpoints to get because Ukrainians have set up all these checkpoints now, not just to stop movement, but to watch for drones and listen for aircraft. Because Ukrainians, if they hear aircraft, it's not going to be Ukrainian, it's going to be Russian. Now, again, as I said, a general's been retired, has noted that there's a leap forward in military challenges, particularly military industrial complexes, and that is effective drone production is now shifted to defense against drones. They can produce all the drones they need, but that's the problem. Both sides can produce a lot of unmanned vehicles very quickly, but they cannot replace either the Air Force or Navy, but they can definitely pretty much say, right, who needs artillery when we can produce for the cost of 10 artillery shells drones? So there's a change, and this was already noted back by von Richten back in World War One, that aircraft will bomb everything, and once you shoot everything, you've achieved victory. This concept was carried out later by tank warfare, however, but the Ukrainian conflict has seen a leap forward in air combat, particularly low-altitude air combat, and air combat between drones is now occurring. However, electronic warfare has now emerged, with Russia supplying rifles able to eliminate UAVs with pellets, but drone detection systems and other means need to be improved. That's why he's saying need to be developed. Improved is the actual word I think you're looking for. But over 100 drones targeted Moscow today. All but one, I think, was shot down. This lone drone crashed. I think electronic warfare got it. But increasingly, yes, Russia needs to develop more, and because if they don't, Ukraine will overwhelm them. And it's the same thing. If Ukraine doesn't develop more electronic warfare, Russia will overwhelm them. So as long as there's detente, there's a good chance of the war ending soon. If not, they're both going to be defiant, because they've now effectively, as China says, we're working to contain Russia, America in Iran. They don't want the war in Iran to end. They don't want America to take the Iranian deal. That's why all the deals are so irrational. And they want to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, because ultimately China is sitting there on its 90-day reserves, hoping that the West will be bankrupt after a month of high fuel costs. But as long as other countries are able to step up production, the Strait of Hormuz is also going to turn. So right now it's a counterbalance, right? Because originally, what was the war in Ukraine about? It was about Ukraine wanting to seize the Russian oil in Crimea to pay their debts. Ukraine could not feed itself. I don't know why. They used to be able to feed themselves. Ukraine is in a pickle. They sold their oil, and they didn't just sell their oil, they sold the rights. So now they're in trouble. They turn to grabbing the Russian oil to increase their hold on Black Sea oil, and it's now working against them. And now, according to Viktor Orban, Ukraine, with its supporters in Brussels, are wanting to oust Viktor Orban and put in a EU government. Not a Ukrainian from the EU in charge of Hungary as some sort of caretaker, because Viktor Orban is a Russian agent. And so 10 people of 10 million, right, over 1 million turned out to protest across Hungary about Ukraine. So they're taking this threat seriously against replacing Viktor Orban, because Hungary doesn't want a war with Russia. It doesn't mean they're pro-Russian. They realise that they're the front line. They don't want their country destroyed, like back in the almost happened in World War One. Now, Zelensky, this is a 1,000-year-old state. Do you think you can scare us with your war blockades, blackmails, threats? Yeah, this will stop here. Look at them rallying all across Ukraine. Huge turnouts in every city, all across Budapest, as well as all across Budapest, central Budapest. People marching because of the threat of violence by Ukraine against their leaders. Threats from the pro-Ukrainian opposition in Hungary to basically suspend elections, arrest Orban, to dissolve Hungary's sovereignty over to Brussels, because you can't be trusted to do the right thing, they say. So this is what they think of you, right? That doing the right thing means to obey them, right? They do not have any credible belief about democracy. And there are threats against Tucker Carlson. Now, I do not personally like Tucker Carlson. I don't personally know Tucker Carlson. Sometimes he's done some really brilliant videos. Otherwise, you're saying, what the fuck are you smoking, bro? What is this conspiracy you're yapping about with no proof? And all of a sudden, Prince from, what's his name? Not Prince. I think his last name is Prince, actually. The guy from Blackwater is suddenly Tucker Carlson's friend. And it's like, what? You hated the guy for the Iraq War. And now he's all laughing about it. I think, yeah, again, it's journalism and journalistic integrity goes out the window when you want the interview. It's the same with the interview with Putin. It's like, you could ask some pretty serious questions, but he did say some pretty serious stuff, which I thought for a while Tucker's getting back to the expose everything, that Russia isn't this bankrupt, degenerate country that the European media is pointing out. And he gets 100 million views around the world. But then he squanders it all by not exposing the Gazan line. No, he wants to expose Israel. It's like, Gaza's the biggest blackmail operation in the world. $400 million in blackmail money is paid to them every month to not attack Israel. And now whenever Israel, even if they're late with a payment, they get attacked. Tucker could have exposed all that. Same with Ukraine. Tucker could have exposed Ukraine and explain, have Putin explain, but instead we get a historical lesson. No, we don't need that. What we want is for Tucker Carlson to basically say, hey, Dave, you were right. I should have gone into the whole Ukraine war in the modern sense, in the modern era, what happened since 91 in Ukraine. And explain how Ukraine has been at war with itself since the end of the Soviet Union. That several factions have been slowly eliminated, one pushed out. The socialists from Ukraine have been gone into exile into Spain. Some have gone into Canada. But now you've got all these Ukrainians coming back to, and some want to back Zelensky simply because of the threats of violence around the world. The Ukrainian community is at war with itself. Threats of violence, blackmail, intimidation. Because they want this cult of personality now where Zelensky is Ukraine, and Ukraine is whatever Zelensky wants it to be. No, that's, I thought Europeans were, there's no kings, but, apparently King Zelensky, oh no, president. So, there seems to be no credible opposition right now in Ukraine. They all seem to be just wanting to fight the war a different way than Zelensky. Because anybody who talks of peace doesn't last in Ukraine. They get killed. Even in Spain or Canada, there's just nothing, right? The Ukrainian opposition has all but disappeared. Now, the Russian armed forces today claim to have hit Ukrainian energy facilities. Again, they do not seem to be focused on, And there we have the, these giant mortars. Amazing technology. And again, one of the things that Putin pointed out was the jealousy in the West. The Russians can do things cheaper. They may not be as fancy, but they get the job done. Now, yeah, they have a lot of things that are copied from Western technologies. They have a lot of things they didn't develop on their own. And there's a lot of things they bought from China and the West. But ultimately, Russia's goal was to be treated as a serious world power. And Europe has always been at Russia's throat since the Napoleonic Wars. Now, there was only brief times that West has got along anyway. And I think once we start to see the current generation of boomers decrease, we're going to see a shift in policy. But the millennials seem to be taking on the boomers' angst without knowing why the boomers are angry at Russia and the Cold War. They don't understand it. And what they don't understand, they fear, and they want to carry out the revenge fantasies of Adam Schiff, who wants revenge on Russia for the Schiff Mercantile Bank. Look it up, Jacob Schiff. We have a lot of people who have talked about Russia as the enemy now, and the TV used to mock them, right? Romney, Obama mocked Romney. Remember all that? You know, the 90s cool, they want the foreign policy back. But yeah, Canada used to talk about trade with Russia and then cut that off with trade for China. Now, I think a big mistake in the West is not realizing China is helping Europe isolate Russia so that China can take over more of Russian industry and Russian... it's all one big game in which there are so many moving parts and so many people telling lies. And I'm trying to push through this web of deception. And Ukraine seems to be at the center of it. And again, Ukraine's whole motive is to seize this so they can sell it to Britain, lease it, to Britain, and get all the oil revenue because it's worth almost as much as the rest of the Ukrainian economy. And Russia wants to hold on to it because it's a strategic point in which they can come up, have a huge base, have a narrow checkpoint in which to defend, and an invasion point and launching point into Russia. Now, Russia could initially hold them back, but they now have to fight on two fronts. And on top of that, they have, this is why they want to block Iran from being a Western ally, so the US can't build up for an invasion of Russia. They're not thinking about just today. They're thinking very long term here, right? Because they have the Baltic to deal with, they have Finland to deal with, and they're trying to... They're dealing with internal problems. And the West is just nat to get their revenge, to build up their own, because they can't build their economy, so the only way they can is to tear others down. But the problem is, by getting rid of the Russian cars made in Russia, now they've got all the cars made in China. They have literally shot themselves in the foot, because at least the cars made cheaply in Russia were 50% European owned, which would float and balance the European economy. Whereas now you've got the all made in China, and China's got a much larger population, so you can't displace them and create an equal economy. Europe's best chance was equalization with Russia. No, they wanted to overtake Russia and thus take over Russian industry and turn them into a vassal state, producing goods cheaply for them. This is what they wanted with China. This is what they now want with India. They're still acting as if they've got a bigger army, a bigger manpower. They just haven't and can't get out of their liberal doctrine of more is better, right? Always go, right? They want cheaper goods, but they don't want to lower the wages in order to produce cheaper goods at home. No, they want these they think they can have this liberal economy where lawyers and doctors earn hundreds of thousands of dollars, and everybody else is on welfare, and somehow the retailers get rich on selling lots of low-cost goods from other countries. It's just so unsustainable. And the Ukraine war is just exposing more and more cracks in the liberal ideology. And here's the problem. It's the hidden debt, right? All these country borrowings, none of them are reporting it. So we don't know how much England owes. We don't know how much Hungary and all those others owes. We know that Eastern Europe's debts are much lower than Western Europe's. Hungary is refusing to borrow more money to pay for the Ukraine war. England is demanding they do it because it's the right thing to do. No, it's not. You're not the arbitrators of right and wrong. You know the statement, the customer knows best? Well, that applies to the citizens. The citizens of Hungary knows best what's for Hungary, not England. England is only acting not even acting in their own interest, they're acting in the interest of Keir Starmer and the bankers, right? And I've told people, you can privatize banks, okay? Get away from corporate banking and get rid of the monkey off your back, the credit card. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel and support me on Patreon, Ko-Fi, buy my books, buy my merch. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.